Hey, this is Paul Colligan. Welcome to the show. What we're doing here, and hey, Walt Studio, hello as well, my friend. What we're doing here today is fun. And I'm going to be running everything from a mind map that I've created for you. And if you do the sign up thing, I'll get you access to this mind map as well. But basically, I'm doing the show in such a way that I'm going to do sort of a pre-show before I do the show. And then I'm going to do the show, and then we'll do a post-show as well. It'll be interesting to see what folk do with this. And so basically what you're looking at today is this is a live recording of the podcast report. And you can see this over at www.thepodcastreport.com/75, which is this page right here. And you might be watching it right here. Podcast Report is the home of my podcast. I would love to have you subscribe to it. Here we've got the link to the podcast launch checklist. If you want to pick that up, we've got some subscription options, and then we've got the links that we've mentioning in the show. But I'm recording that live. Now, some of you are going to be over at the Podcast Report site. Hey, those of you over at the Podcast Report site, and some of you are going to be over at YouTube because, that's the way it works. You're going to be over at YouTube. So feel free to be wherever you want. If you want to make comments, you definitely want to do it over here at YouTube, but we're going to get that funky little effect as we go back and forth, but that's kind of the way it goes. Now, what the Podcast Report is, my goal for the Podcast Report was always to do a podcast for podcasters that didn't have the lame introduction and what I had for lunch and that kind of thing, but go specifically in depth with what it is that podcasters need, what it is the podcasters should be doing. My avatar for the show is the podcaster looking to do more business as a result of their podcast. And so that's what the show is about. Again, would love to have you subscribe. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take some Q&A first, before we go live into this. If you want to do Q&A and you're on this page, go ahead and just click on this link. That'll take you out to YouTube, and then you'll be able to ask Q&A right inside of YouTube. And of course, if you're over at YouTube, you can do those questions right there as well. And of course, if you want to just get to the content, we can just get to the content as well. Either way, I think we'll be at a good place. I'm going to hit pause on these so we don't get the picture-in-picture problems that we had before. So go ahead and ask any QAs you want. I'm not going to do Q&A during the actual training part of the podcast, because what happens is you get distracted. You're looking around the screen. You've seen it already. I'm looking around the screen, and it makes for interesting video, and it's kind of fun if you're live. But if you hear this on audio, it's pretty lame. So when we do the actual podcast recording, I'm going to be focusing on the audio first, and that's what I'm going to give you. Now, I will be keeping this video. I'm going to embed it at the site, and it'll be available forever. If something disastrous happens in the video, which sometimes happens, I will certainly have the right to edit it or take it down or that kind of thing, but we'll have some version of this. I expect this to go well. Lately, the webcasts have been going incredibly well, but I did watch a webcast last night by a hero of mine that went incredibly bad, and so it was a bit of a sobering effect, and we'll see what happens. But if you're, so if you got to go do something or that kind of thing, I understand, come back. I do definitely want to take some Q&A and do some interaction and show everybody what we're doing. The mind map, I'm showing you the mind map right now. And what I'll do with the mind map here is if you are on this page and you sign up for the podcast launch checklist, part of what I'll give you there, and I'll explain it a little bit further in the recording as well, but I will give you this mind map that we're looking at. It's not necessarily anything genius about the mind map, and as a matter of fact, I'm already seeing a typo in the mind map, and I'll walk you through that as well. But if you want to see how I prepare my shows, this is a fascinating and interesting way to do it. So I'm looking at the things. Looks like there's no questions before, but it looks like a bunch of you are popping on as this speaks. So what I'll do is I will definitely save all of the questions for after this, during the Q&A part of this, and we should have some fun there, and then we'll go right into this and have a blast. So there are more of you in here than I necessarily thought there would be. So thank you so much. It is a pleasure to have you all here. Now, it's funny, I'll show you here before we go live. I always have the big idea for the show. If you ever watch the show, I have a big idea for every episode. What happens is, when you look at the show, you can see every episode has a big idea. Don't assume your favorite podcast has a solid monetization plan. The unexamined podcast isn't worth recording. Serial on Pandora proves the reach of a podcast can be bigger than a podcast. I have these big ideas, and I actually have 3 big ideas for the show, and they're actually the points my podcast predictions for 2016 are the big ideas for the show. And those will go out. But it's kind of funny. You can see in my notes that I wrote myself here, I need a big idea. Don't worry, I have one. And I'm perfectly okay with that. What I'm going to do here, just to make it a little bit easier, just in case anything pops up emergency-wise, I'm going to open up another tab that has this. And I'm going to turn, okay, yeah, the audio is off there. And then we can see, good. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, one more thing about doing the show. Whenever I do the show, I do it straight through. And then my editor chops out the moments and the bits and that type of thing. So you'll just hear me make some pauses, and I'll probably motion the camera, that type of thing. And that will be fun. So I'm going to take 30 seconds, and then we'll record it. It looks like we're, about where I wanted to be into this. So awesome. Podcast predictions for 2016. It's the Podcast Report, episode number 75. Show notes, links, conversation, and more at thepodcastreport.com/75. First, the big idea, and I've got 3 of them for you. Big idea number 1. Actually, I've got 4 of them for you. Podcasts and Google Play will bring no more than 5% growth to any podcast. Number 2, 2016 is the year advertising drops from number 1 on the monetization list. Big idea number 3, I'll stream my podcast on Pandora before I record my next predictions piece. And big idea number 4, podcasters will be introducing app-based calls to action. This is the Podcast Report, and me first. My name is Paul Colligan. I'm a podcaster, podcast consultant, podcast author, fan of the industry. I've been doing this for a long time. I love this industry. I love the podcasters, and that's why I do this show. The avatar for the show is podcasters looking to make their podcast a real business or do real business as a result of their podcast. We try to get straight to the point here. We try to get the work done. The show has never been a massive play, but it will always be a deep one, trying to help you do exactly what it is that you're trying to do. So why this topic? Why this episode? Well, I am cleaning up. I am closing down. I am finishing season 1. This is the last recording of what we're going to call season 1. Now, it took a couple of years to make season 1 happen. That's okay. We've got some new stuff coming. Season 2 is going to start on January 9th of 2016. So I'm taking about a 1-month hiatus. Don't worry. I've got some very, very cool things coming out that I'll be showing to you. I'm doing a predictions piece for a number of reasons. Prediction pieces are always fun to do. People love prediction pieces. My 2015 prediction piece was actually my most popular episode of the Podcast Report. And don't worry, we're going to take a look at my predictions and see how well those fared. It's good to plan for the future. If you want to know what's coming in the future, if you want to at least think to plan to what's coming in the future, it's good to go. Now, one of the things I'm doing this episode, you're going to be hearing me speaking a lot to Podcast Launch Checklist. I am producing a checklist of everything you want to do when you're launching a podcast. A bunch of people are launching their podcast in 2016 and they want the checklist, and gosh darn it, I'm building the checklist. And you can head out to podcastlaunchchecklist.com and fill out the form there to get that for you. I'll be referencing that a couple times in there. But if you're looking to launch your podcast, or you have launched your podcast, you want to make sure you do everything, make sure you take a look at podcastlaunchchecklist.com. Also in that, I will include the mind map for this episode so that it can help it make sense. Now, this episode's a little bit different than past episodes. This episode's actually recorded live. As I look at this right now, I'm looking at a screen of the people who are watching this inside of YouTube. People are having a good time. It's always fun to see people watching you live. What's also interesting is just the comments. One of my favorites, Josh Freiberg, is, he's crying because he thinks the show is going away. It's just for a short time. Don't worry, I've got some other things to show you. But we're recording this live, and I'm doing this on YouTube. I'm not doing this on Blab. I'm not doing this on Periscope. I'm not doing this on these other things because these platforms, I've spoken to that in the past, I don't think have a long shelf life. I've also be able to do things like share my screen, higher resolution, and that type of thing when I do things on video. If you want to watch the video version of this, go ahead and head out to thepodcastreport.com/75, and that'll take you right to this episode, and it'll make things a little bit easier for you. But yeah, I'm recording this live. The video recording of this will actually be a little bit longer than the audio recording of this. I did a bit of a pre-show at the beginning, and then I'm doing a post-show where I'm actually going to answer some Q&A, respond to people. I do have to respond to Elizabeth Harrington, who says she loves the early predictions. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's there. We'll take Q&A about what I have to say at the end of this. So the first thing we have to do is we have to look at my podcast predictions for 2015, because I made 3 and I want to chat about them. Now, the first one was tongue-in-cheek. The first one I said was there's going to be 5,000 new 7-day-a-week podcasts with the word on fire in the title. John Lee Dumas' friend, inspiration, hero, icon, whatever you want to call him, he has definitely dictated the dialogue and dictated where people are going and what people are chatting about. And the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people who think that podcasting has to be, in the format of what John Lee Dumas does. I went to Podcast Movement this year, and I met a guy in the elevator who had a topic that was not something that you would want to talk about 7 days a week for about 40 minutes a day, but because of John Lee's influence. And it's funny, John Lee, I think, is doing it well. I think a lot of people are just taking John's influence a little bit further than they necessarily should. There are a lot of people who think the formula is 7 shows a week. The formula is interview. The formula is entrepreneurs. There's not a formula to podcasting. Part of what's wonderful about podcasting is that you have all of these options. So we've seen a lot of folk with on fire in the title. We've seen a lot of folk emulating John because they think that's the secret weapon. John would tell you that's not the secret weapon. I would tell you that's not the secret weapon. But there have been a lot of people trying to jump in. But that one was tongue-in-cheek. Let's hit the next one. A number of pointless podcast-in-a-box products will launch. I said that was going to happen, and boy, did that happen. It's funny, at Podcast Movement again, there was the hall with a lot of people promising great things for podcasts. Everything from podcast hosting, podcast in a box, to interview solutions, this type of thing. None of them panned out. One of the companies that I was really excited about, the CEO gave me his card and said, if you have any problems, let me know. Well, we did one. We had a problem, let him know, and he never responded. There are a lot of people who want to make podcasting more complicated than it is. There are a lot of people who want to make podcasting more complicated than it is. That's really the term. And a number of pointless podcasts in a box have popped up. I've had some friends who've jumped over, who put their podcast on some of these, and it's not going to go well. And I really feel bad for them because, gosh darn it, it's simple. We've got hosts now. I'm a big fan of Libsyn. I've been recommending them, but even if you don't go with Libsyn, it doesn't need to be complicated. The RSS feed doesn't need to be complicated. And well, gosh darn it, yes, I was really, really right there. The other one that I was right with was my third prediction, was that big announcements would have minimal show results. And I actually have some interesting numbers for you. I spoke to this on a previous episode, but Spotify and one of my popular clients, 2.1 million downloads, incredible show, incredible audience, love her dearly. And I can say that. I looked at the stats yesterday, only 207 people came from Spotify. 2.1 million downloads, 207 of them came from Spotify. Now, she hasn't been on Spotify the entirety of the 2.1 million download run, but the fact of the matter is it went down. The November download numbers were down from the October download numbers, and so it's not going up. I spoke a couple episodes ago to Android being inside, and a podcast being inside of Google Play, and that's all fine and dandy, but that's really not going to make that kind of a blip either. So I said I said big announcements will have minimal show results. The big announcements have come. There have been minimal show results. I've spoken in the past to we need to be in charge of our own podcast. We need to be in charge of our own marketing. We need to be in charge of our own promoting. And that is what we have to do. And nothing came this year that's going to change the game. And I'm going to tell you this, nothing is going to come next year that is going to change the game either. It's just the game that we're dealing with. We are responsible for getting our podcast out the door, not other people. So those were the 3 predictions for 2015. Now I'm making 4 predictions for 2016, and they are considerably bigger and considerably more... what's the word I'm looking for? They're bigger and they're more decisive and they're less nebulous and there's nothing tongue-in-cheek. So the first prediction here is simply that podcast in Google Play is not going to add more than 5% growth to any podcast. It's great, submit your show to Google Play, but you're not going to see more than 5% growth as a result of that. That is prediction number 1. Now, what do we do with this? Well, quite simply, 1, you are responsible for your own show promotion. You are responsible for your own show promotion. Your show is going to make you famous. Your show is going to see the revenue that you're looking for when you promote it. Not when Google promotes it, not when iTunes promotes it. It seems like one of the big themes this year, and it's not going to be a theme of season 2, is that, this didn't produce magic results. This didn't produce magic results. This didn't produce magic results. These things didn't produce magical results because there is no magical results inside of podcasting. That's just not the industry that we're in. If you're looking for magical results, you might want to go to some sort of industry like maybe magic or that type of thing. If you go to podcastchecklist.com, we're working on the ultimate podcast launch checklist that will help you work through all the steps of promotion and all the steps of marketing and making sure that before your show goes out the door, before you launch, you will have the things needed to do your own show promotion because it is your job. If you've already launched your podcast, it's okay. Head on over to podcastlaunchchecklist.com and grab the checklist as well because, gosh darn it, I bet you aren't doing everything. I was about to say anything. No, you're doing some things. You're just not doing everything. So again, prediction number 1, podcasts in Google Play bring no more than 5% growth to any podcast. I stand strong on that one. Prediction number 2, 2016 is the year advertising drops from number 1 on the monetization list. That's right. Everybody, I'm going to get ads, I'm going to get ads, I'm going to get ads. This is the year it drops. And let me tell you why it drops. And I've got some numbers for you that will sober you up. And we're going to show them to you right here if you're looking at the video. If you're not, you can get the checklist by heading out to episode 75. So Rob Walsh over at Libsyn just gave some pretty fantastic numbers. And, well, here we go. In October 2015, the median episode download. Now, median is in the middle, not the average, because you got people like Mark Maron and that kind of thing who are just downloading billions of them. But if you look at the middle, all the podcasts downloaded, you look in the middle, 137 downloads. That's the middle. So if you're getting more than 137 downloads per episode, the fact of the matter is, congratulations. You are doing better than most. You are literally in the top 50%, which could be really exciting for some people. A lot of people watching this, I know your shows. You can probably say out loud, wow, I'm in the top 50% of all of Libsyn. Didn't know that, didn't see that. But the fact of the matter is, more than, and this is really, really, really key, more than half of the podcast episodes out there are only getting 136 or less downloads. Think about that. If you're doing ads, 136 downloads per, you gotta do like 8 episodes before you get your first CPM, and they're not gonna sell that to you. Well, Paul, where else does it go? Well, look, if they're doing greater than 5,000 downloads, they're in the top 8.3% of all of podcasting. 5,000 downloads at a 20 CPM is still just $100 an episode. And if you're only making $100 an episode and you're the top 8.3% of all of Libsyn, I think you can do better here. What Rob said about this is that's the magic number where CPM campaigns start to make sense. And yeah, I would agree with him there. If you're looking to do ads, you can insert an ad, you get 5,000 downloads, you take about $20 per take for yours. I mean, to record an episode and to get a check for $100 isn't bad, but it's not the big thing. And here's the thing, podcasts that get more than 10,000 downloads per episode are the top 5% of all of Libsyn. And no, Libsyn is not the only host out there, but boy, Libsyn hosts a lot of them, and it's pretty huge. Guys, the models of ads as the way you're going to make money is just not sustainable. You've got to figure out what your monetization plan is and how it's not ad insertion. And if you head out to podcastchecklist.com, we've got, part of the process is figuring out what your monetization strategy is. Would love to have you, do that, but the ad models just aren't sustainable. So the next prediction, I predict that I'm going to stream my podcast on Pandora before I record my next predictions piece. This is huge. I spoke to Pandora taking on Serial in a previous episode, and there have been a lot of podcasters who have said Pandora isn't interested. And the fact of the matter is, no, Pandora isn't interested at all, but I think the numbers are going to change. I think they're going to become very interested. And the whole infrastructure of podcasting is pretty easy. And for them to bring podcasting into Pandora would make a heck of a lot of sense. It would be good for the podcasters. It would be good for Pandora. When it's good for both sides of it, why would they not do it? So I predict that it's going to happen. I predict it's going to happen by, my next predictions piece. And I certainly intend on doing a predictions piece in 2016. Now, there's no reason for them not to take podcasts. That's part of my logic there. It might be ghettoed. I showed you those Spotify numbers, for my client, and the fact of the matter is it's just not getting the attention it deserves. I think this will grow in the future, but I think we'll see our show and our content inside of Pandora, which is really the last bastion for all this to happen. I think that's going to happen pretty quickly. And again, the whole idea of making yourself a show, not a podcast, we've got a couple of ideas for that in the podcast checklist. Now, this next one is a bit bold. I'm saying that podcasters are going to introduce app-based CTAs, app-based calls to action, where we're going to tell people not to visit the website or not to visit a domain name, but actually to download an app and take some action on the app. Paul, are you going to be doing this? You bet I am. I don't just have one app coming out. I've got two apps coming out, and I've got a blast with them. One of them looks like it's almost any moment now will be available in the iTunes store. And don't worry, I'm not just doing it in the iTunes store. It's going to go to the Android store. It's going to go to the Kindle store and that type of thing as well. But I think what we're going to see is, it's more valuable to bring people over to an app than it is something else. Apps in small numbers, if you sold the right product, could do really well. They're sexier, they're more attractive than websites, and I think we're going to see some more of that. So I got two of those coming. Definitely keep a watch out for those. And if you sign up for podcastchecklist.com, we've got a little bit about apps in there as well. And that, of course, will mean that you are on the list, and it'll make sure that you've got the ability to be updated when these things come out. So what am I doing next year? What am I doing in conjunction with these thoughts? And by the way, if you are watching this live, if you are on the live video stream and you want to make a comment about this in any way, shape, or form, that would be great. That would be a lot of fun, and we can make some comments there. Again, we'll just go with these quickly. Podcast and Google Play will bring no more than 5% growth to any podcast. 2016 will be the year that traditional advertising drops from number one on the monetization list. I predict I will stream my podcast on Pandora before I produce my next predictions piece. Boy, I did not meant that to be as alliterative as it was, but there it is. And then the idea that podcasters are going to start introducing app-based calls to action. So there we go. What am I doing? I'm rebooting. I am, as I mentioned earlier, the podcast is going to be a bit of a hiatus. We're going to bring this thing up at the beginning of January next year. I'm going to look a lot into opt-ins, getting email addresses, as well as getting people to take a look at apps. If you get yourself on the podcast launch checklist, I will report to how this opt-in grab went. I'm being very obvious here to what I want, but I'm providing some great value for it. So it's an interchange that I think is going to happen well. I'll tell you this, by just putting in this opt-in, there were a number of people who signed up for this before the show even happened, which is a very, very cool idea. I'm going to focus on these issues. I'm going to continue to promote my own show. I'm going to continue to look at opt-ins. I'm going to look at monetization outside of advertising, and I'm not going to look for anybody big to bring me my audience. I'm going to look for my own marketing efforts to bring me the audience. Paul, you're going to do that with an app? You bet I am. And we're going to have some fun with that. I would recommend that you do the same. What do you do with this? Well, I always recommend in the podcast report that you do something. I want you to grab the checklist. If your podcast doesn't meet things in this checklist, get that stuff figured out right away. Now, I would love your thoughts here. The podcast report's pretty much everywhere online. You can head out to thepodcastreport.com/Twitter to find us on Twitter, thepodcastreport.com/Facebook to find us on Facebook /Google Plus, to find us on Google Plus /LinkedIn, whatever you want. We're all over social. If you want to make a comment about today's episode or do something over at Facebook or follow us there, that would be great. The blog remains up. Go ahead and comment away. A lot of people don't realize with all the different options that we actually do have comments right here in the blog. And I'm showing everybody who's watching this that ability. But, right down here, you've got the ability through Discuss to make comments. And, of course, doing this live, nobody's made a comment yet. But you can do that. I would love to have your comments on the show. Links at /episode number 75. I've got 3 simple links. We've got How to Podcast, which is the book. The book's currently being updated to the 2016 version. If you have the 2015 version, make sure it's registered. And if the 2015 version is the only version still available to you when you're listening to this, grab that, register it. That will be your cheapest path. Podcaster Cart is the e-commerce system that we've launched for podcasters, and Podcast Launch Checklist is the checklist that I'm promoting strongly because I think it's going to be very, very powerful for you. So I am going to say goodbye, at least to the live version of this. One of the most powerful things about podcasting is simply the fact that you don't just listen to a single episode, but the fact that the episodes can come directly to you. This is what podcasting is all about. This is the subscription thing that makes podcasting so powerful. So if you're listening to this for the first time because you want to hear the predictions, definitely subscribe to the show. This will let you go back to previous episodes, but this will also let you get the next episode when it comes out, when season 2 comes out. Would love to have you there. The numbers will show you that the biggest source of production is iTunes. The biggest source of your downloads is iTunes. That'll be about 80% of your downloads. So if you head out to thepodcastreport.com/iTunes, you'll find the ability to subscribe there. But you can also go to thepodcastreport.com/Stitcher, which is a very popular Android client that currently works, or /Pocket Cast, which is actually my favorite one. Not quite as popular, but very, very good. Great thing about Pocket Cast is it works on both the iPhone and the Android platform. You can go to /TuneIn or /Spreaker or /iHeartRadio or /Overcast. Once Google Play is all set up, we will have that as well. And it is fun to see. Again, if you want to do social media, head out to thepodcastreport.com/Twitter or thepodcastreport.com/Facebook. If you would like to email, I would love to take a look at thepodcastreport.com@outlook.com. A review to iTunes is always lovely. So we got a couple of questions here in the Q&A area that I want to take a look at, and we'll go from that. Elizabeth wanted to know, what about podcast shows on Netflix and HBO on the go? I don't think we're going to see shows there, but we are going to see, and this is really, really interesting, and boy, I've got the bad boy upstairs. The new Apple TV is quite fantastic, and there's a global search in there. And right now the global search is just iTunes and Netflix and Hulu, but I'll tell you, it's coming. And when you got an Apple TV where you search for something and your show shows up, Elizabeth, right next to Game of Thrones or that type of thing, we're at a really, really interesting place. So you're not going to be on Netflix, you're not going to be on HBO, but you can be on the same screen as Netflix and HBO, which I think is really, really, really interesting. And it's funny, we've seen that in podcasting. You know, you're not going to be on Sirius, but you're going to be on the same stereo system that people used to pay for Sirius for. They're now just spending that money on data and listening to podcasts. So it's a great little question. And little isn't the right word. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that one. Robert wants to know, will you make a PDF of your mind map available? Yes, definitely. Actually, if you head out to thepodcastreport.com/75, you'll see we've got the opt-in, or we've got a link to the opt-in for, if you go right here to the podcast launch checklist, that will get you a copy of the PDF, and we should go from there. So thank you everybody much for the questions. For those of you listening to the audio, we had a bit of a hiccup, and the computer froze. First time this MacBook Pro has froze on me at a live event, which is kind of fascinating and kind of interesting. But this will be edited up in post. You won't notice that. Just the true fans who hung on will. But thank you so much, everybody. It has been a blast having you. This was fun to do. I will chat with you, not next week like I normally say, but we'll be chatting in the month of January in some pretty cool ways. Do check out podcastchecklist.com. I would love to have you inside of that, and make sure you subscribe to the show so that future stuff comes to you, because trust you me this, there's some pretty fabulous stuff coming to you very, very soon.